You're Locked On Wild. Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, that was something. Minnesota Wild lose tonight by a score of 5-2 to the Nashville Predators, and we are here talking it out, going through some of the things that we noticed in the game and areas for improvement going forward here this season. Obviously, some of my initial thoughts from the game is that the Wild were definitely not ready for this game, whatever reason that was coming off of a back-to-back. You can't really use that because Nashville was coming off of a back-to-back themselves. It just felt like we saw kind of this boiling point of all of these things that have been issues, last season into the start of this season as well. The Wilds finally got to a deficit that they could not climb back out of, trailing 3-0 in the first period. That obviously was an insurmountable lead here tonight. The penalty kill became a major issue here in tonight's game, as has been kind of a lingering trend for this team going back to last season as well. Capo Kakinen had an uneven game. I'm going to call it uneven because I, had a chance to see the replays of the goals that he allowed, and I'm not going to blame him for a couple of them, but there are a couple that are 100% on him that need to be saved as starting goalies in the NHL. And so, the other thing too is becoming a trend is the disappearance of some of the top players on this Wild team. But this is a 4-1 team. It's not as though we are in a situation like the Chicago Blackhawks where you're looking at everything that they're doing and saying this is a disaster, and that they're already rumored to be making or looking at making a coaching change. We're not in that sort of a situation for this Wild team. There is room for improvement, to say the least. But this team still is 4-1. They have won 4 games, despite not having their best on the ice on any given night. Okay, now that I have kind of decompressed some of my initial thoughts, Ian with some comments that we'll get into here. Ian saying we couldn't keep winning these games going down and coming back. Agreed. They still haven't had the dominant signature win yet. I agree fully with that. The full 60-minute win. Ian's hitting it right on the head. A couple of games in a row now where the top lines were a non-factor. The penalty kill has not been where they want it. Fully agree like that. A soft 4-1 record. Is definitely that is definitely a way that you can look at it that I would not fault anybody for, because look at the formula that has gotten them to that point. Come from behind wins, slow starts, and so this 4-1 feels like talent winning out at the end of the day. But this is, as we saw tonight, this is not a sustainable method going throughout the course of the season. It's not going to be something every given night that they can get themselves 1 or 2 goals behind and try to rally from and win. And so for this Wild team, first and foremost, is they just have to be better off the puck drop. They got to have some games that they can really take control of early and win, because this whole falling behind by a goal or 2 goals in the first period thing, it wears on you. And we saw it tonight, that it gets to be too much of a hole if the team that you're playing is able to match you every single time. And credit to Nashville. They played well tonight. They definitely did not play like a 1-4 team coming off of a 6-4 loss to the Winnipeg Jets. They played like a team that has grit and, a rookie goaltender coming out and picking up his first win in the NHL. Like he played well. Also, the Wild had some chances, albeit later in the game, but at the end of the day, that 3-0 deficit was just way too much to try to dig out for a fifth consecutive game coming from behind. And so I always like to in these situations, take a breath, reassess, and try to figure out the ways that this team can improve and what they need to do going into their next games because it's a tough slate for the Wild this week. They've got some tough games on the schedule, and so the Wild need to take a breath. They need to, kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit tomorrow at XL Energy Center ahead of the Winnipeg game. Now I'm sure they'll travel as well at some point, maybe on Tuesday with the fact that it's a 9 o'clock game. But they need to just take some time to just absorb this and figure out where things went wrong and where they need to improve. And again, I'll go to what some of the comments that Ian is mentioning is this is not like a season's over type of loss for this team by any means. This team just has a different gear that they are capable of getting to that they have not hit yet. And so um it's just a situation of, tipping your cap to the opposing team for coming out and taking this game early. Roman Yossi, having a great game, and Johansson and Duchesne as well, as Ian notes. Um, they played very, very well in this game tonight. And so Nashville definitely earned it. The Wilds, too many penalties, and some of their top line guys just disappeared here tonight. And that's just how it works in the NHL. You're not going to win every game you play. Um, the biggest thing is how do you adjust and how do you handle that adversity as you go. And so I'm going to kind of navigate first through some of the things that I liked. The big positive coming out of tonight's game is, you know, I think this fourth line is becoming very quickly the lifeblood of this team. You've got two guys um, in Nico Sturm and Brandon Duhaime who um, are huge energy and effort type players. And we saw that again tonight. Duhaime and Sturm, Sturm getting a goal, Bugstad getting a goal, and Duhaime assisting on one of those goals as well. This fourth line is starting to become, the heartbeat of this team, much like the Foligno, Hartman, and Greenway line was last year, which we saw. I mean, the Foligno, Greenway, and Eriksson Ek line. I beg your pardon, which we saw again tonight, and I'll get to that in a second. But this fourth line, the Sturm, Duhaime, and Bugstad line, they're doing some really nice things. They again got rewarded with their play, getting a chance to start off the third period. Um, and that's the kind of stuff that coaches notice. And that's the kind of stuff that we that cover the team notice. This fourth line, when a lot of guys kind of mailed it in midway through this game, this fourth line did not. And so that's really encouraging to see is that you have a line that's going to battle no matter where you're at in the game. And I would love to see more opportunities for those guys because I think they can handle it and I think they've earned it. But credit to that line as well. As Nick Bugstad has looked good for this team to where, as Ian mentions, there's potential for some lineup changes, most notably Rem Pitlick. I leave that fourth line completely alone. And I know going into the season, Nick Bugstad was maybe a name that would be a guy that would be, the healthy scratch a handful of times a season. I do not separate this fourth line at all. I think all of those guys have earned the time, and they deserve to continue to be able to help this team fight through this early on in the season. And so that leaves some questions as to what the rest of the picture looks like for Lions. We saw Evison go back to Foligno, Greenway, and Eriksson Ek, just to try to give this team a little bit of a jolt down the stretch, because that the top line tonight with Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek, and Zuccarello, yes, they did have some chances, but it's starting to seem like Kirill Kaprizov is maybe starting to press a little bit. And yes, I know we're now 5 games into the season, but we've seen Kaprizov take some penalties so far this year, just to try to try to push back at teams being physical with him this year. But that line for the most part was quiet here this evening, and outside of Kevin Fiala, that third line, the Fiala line, was non-existent too. And so it gets to be a lot to ask those guys to single-handedly try to create opportunities for scoring opportunities, Fiala and Kaprizov, and they can only really handle as much as the other team throws at them. And there's a lot of attention being given to those two guys. So for Fiala and Kaprizov, despite the chances they had to be shut down, like that is a concern. At the same time, to flip the coin, the Wild are 4-1 so far this season, with those guys largely not getting going yet. And so that's kind of my overall theme after this first loss of the season, is that yes, there are some things that are becoming a little bit of a little bit of a concern, but at the same time, the Wild have found ways to kind of get through it here in the early part of the season. And Kaprizov's going to get his, Fiala's going to get his. Now, do you make some major shakeups to those lines? I think that is certainly something that could be looked at. However, I don't want to abandon some of these line combos 5 games into the season. Like the Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek, and Zuccarello line, like we saw what they did against Winnipeg. They single-handedly won that game. And so, yes, it's frustrating that they have nights where they're not a factor whatsoever. But at the same time, they do need to, like, you need to have those guys producing if they're playing together. So I'm not going to be upset if Dean Evison shakes things up a little bit to try to get these lines going. And the biggest argument against, I think, Kaprizov and Fiala on the same line has, as Dean Evison said, been to create balance throughout the lineup. Well, what's the point if those guys aren't scoring? And so maybe that's something that gets tried by this Wild team, just to see if it's something that maybe you create this line that is capable of getting the game started on the right foot, and really being able to get this team into an early lead, that they can hold for once. So I think we'll dive into that as the week goes on, but I think line combinations being juggled a little bit is not the worst idea. But at the same time, I do want to make sure that we don't get away from what we thought would work with Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek and Zuccarello, because again, I point to the Winnipeg game as proof that it is possible for that line combo to do their thing. Let's talk Rem Pitlick, because we're getting some comments. Jack commenting that they should make the move to add Pitlick and pull Victor Rask. And so I want to talk about that a little bit, but I also want to give a shout out to Rusty, who commented a little earlier that he's watching. What up, Rusty? Let's talk about Pitlick for Rask. And I'm right with you on this, Jack. I think it's time that we see Rem Pitlick in the lineup to see what he brings to the table. And yes, there are things that Victor Rask does well, but at this point, I don't know where he fits. Like, he doesn't seem to fit on that third line. He doesn't seem to fit as a wing. I will put it this way. I think that Gaudreau is a much better fit for a center for Kevin Fiala than Victor Rask is. And so at this point, I think you have to make that move to see if Pitlick is a better fit as a wing opposite of Fiala. Um, to see if you can get that third line going a little bit. And I know there's a bigger game at play here because in the event that Victor Rask is not re signed in the offseason, which I don't think he will be, there is potential that he could be dangled at the deadline, depending on where this Wild team is at, to help facilitate that process and to potentially carve out a spot for Marco Rossi to come up maybe later in the year and get some playing time. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't know where Victor Rask fits on this team, and so it makes all the sense in the world that Rem Pitlick makes his season debut on Tuesday against Vancouver because this Wild offense they struggled against Nashville. And if you're going to do any sort of line juggling, that makes all the sense in the world. And so I would look for that to be the case, to see Pitlick in, to see what he brings to this team. Was on the game stream with the Soda Pod guys, and State of Hoppy mentioned that Pitlick has been a goal scorer at every level in which he has played, and so give the guy a shot because what we know about Victor Rask um, at this point in his career is pretty set. He is a guy, he's a complimentary guy on whatever line he plays on, and he's not going to be a guy that generates a ton of chances himself. He's going to be a guy that benefits from players around him doing things to kind of move the needle and make the action happen. He is going to be one of those, tap and birdie type players. And for those that don't know, I do love to use golf analogies in my hockey coverage. So obviously those tap and goals right around the net. He's a guy that benefits from players around him dictating how the action goes. And so at this point, why not see if Pitlick can give you a little bit more? Worst case scenario is that he's not going to offer anything. And then at that point, it's okay. We claimed him off waivers just to see if he could be a piece that that would be able to help out this team. And yes, as Rusty mentions, Rask did have the pretty sick birdie previously this season, but I think it's time to give Rask a seat. Let him take some things in and give Rem Pitlick a shot to try to inject some bounce into that third line, which has looked okay most of the season, but has also had some games where they just have not. So line changes, and we'll dive into that more throughout the week on Locked On Wild. But let's talk about the goalie situation too, and we'll also dive into this further because weird game for Capo tonight because do I think all of the goals allowed? Do I think all 5 of the goals allowed were his faults? No, I don't think. Um, I don't think there is. You know, I don't think there's a situation in which Capo is fully at fault for all of these goals. The one was a goal that was deflected by Forsberg into the net off of the shot by Yossi, and Capo just didn't see the deflection. There was another goal in which was on Capel as one that he should have been able to take care of, um, that he simply missed with his glove. That is the kind of stuff that we can't have at the goalie position. Is when you have the puck out and you have a chance to glove it and you simply miss. So that one I am not going to give Capo a pass for because he needed to make that play. Talbot maybe makes that play. I feel like that is a play that most goalies will make when the opportunity presents itself. So I'm not giving Capo a pass for that goal. As for a couple of the others, the one was a weird rebound um, in which it was tapped past Kakinen. It was just a bad night for the team um, in general. And I don't know if some of it was rust by Capo having not played yet this year, or or what the case was, but there were certainly a couple of those goals that he allowed that were on him and that need to be saved on a nightly basis. But giving up as many minutes as the Wild did on the penalty kill, which was not great, that doesn't help your goalie out at all. And so, um, I just I don't know. I need to see more. I need to see more from Capo. I need to see another start or two at least from him, um, to see if some of this stuff becomes a trend. Because like that save opportunity that he missed with the glove, like that one really sticks out to me and it really irritates me because it feels like one that a goalie should make. And so, the goalie situation is an annoyance at this point. I'm not in full out panic mode necessarily, um, because, like I said, the Wild are 4-1, and I feel like they really have not played their best hockey of the season, at this point. So it's entirely possible that this goalie situation goes on a run like they did last year, and so I want to give a little bit of an opportunity for them to do that before we start to really pick it apart and say that they're trash. Goose suggesting that the Wild trade for Marc Andre Fleury at the deadline. I wouldn't mind it, but I don't think, from what I've seen from him, that he's really going to help. Um, so I would much rather just stay away from that situation, to say the least. Jesper Wallstedt also is mentioned by Ian, um, playing well in the minors from what I've had a chance to read up on. He will be the guy of the future, which is why I think one of these two will not be with this team when their current contract expires. Maybe both. Um, I don't know if Wallstead has the ability to be like the legit top line starter, then I think that makes the decision to bring Talbot back a pretty easy one to say no. The biggest question is for Capo. Does he project as a serviceable backup goalie for the next several years? If he does, then yeah, there is a universe where he comes back and he can be part of this team going forward. But if not, then I think you cut bait on him too, and you just roll with Wallstead and let him grow and develop. See, that's the other thing too, is if you can speed Wallstead up enough, um, if you can speed him up enough, he's going to have plenty of opportunity to learn in those final couple of years of the Parisi Suter buyouts if he gets here by that point. And so, if that's the case, then he's going to have every opportunity to step in and try to win that spot. Some of the other comments, as Ian mentioned, kind of piggybacking off of what Goose said. Victor Rask for Fleury. Boy, I wish I would put a statue of Bill Guerin outside XL Energy Center if that were to happen. But I think Chicago's going to want a little bit more than that. Unfortunately, I think for a Fleury trade to happen, it would require dipping into that Beckman, Boldy, Rossi tier, and would maybe take two of those guys. So we'll have to see. Braxton mentioning that the team looked flat the whole weekend. I would agree with that. They definitely looked flat tonight, and they were able to overcome the slow start last night. But yeah, it just I don't know. I don't know what, if they're just kind of trying to fight through some things or what the deal is, but yeah, flat is definitely a good way to put it. After these last couple of games, Ian mentioning, unfortunately, even though he is younger, I think right now Kakinen would be gone between the two. That is certainly a fair assessment because the Wild really don't have money at this point, to where if they needed to re-sign Kakinen, that they could do it depending on what he was asking for. So it's certainly possible that he ends up being the first one to go. And then Rusty mentioning, hopefully we know how to lose now and just go on to the next one. Yes, this is a perfect opportunity to just flush this game and move on to Vancouver on Tuesday night on the road, 9 o'clock start. So, as I said, as my theme has been kind of throughout this whole post game and reaction that you'll get tomorrow on Locked On Wild. Tuesday, we'll talk more about Iowa, kind of get the idea of what's going on with some of those Wild prospects, as I was off to a good start. But tomorrow we'll really dive in on some of the things to pull from this game and from the weekend in particular. I'm rolling with this whole theme of room for improvement from this team. So we'll try to kind of pinpoint and diagnose the biggest areas of concern, and we'll try to get those ironed out by the end of the week. But if anybody has any questions to finish things off here, otherwise, I think we'll call it a night here. At the end of the day, a 4-1 start. Yeah, they did not play well tonight, but the team is still 4-1, and they got a chance to get back in the win column on Tuesday. It will be a very tough game. Vancouver is not going to be easy. So Wild are going to need to get off to a better start in order to win that game. And so, yeah, we'll just try to dive in to some of what we took from tonight's game in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Wild and throughout the week as well. So make sure that you are following along so that you don't miss out on any of our lovely Wild content throughout the course of the Locked On Wild hemisphere. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our YouTube channels where you're watching this right now. Anywhere you can find Locked On Wild content, make sure to follow and subscribe because we have a lot of it coming. So I think that's going to do it for tonight. Thanks for everybody that tuned in once again. Love to have the fan interaction, especially after games. And so hopefully we get a better effort from the Wilds on Tuesday. But until then, keep it locked on with Locked On Wild, and we will catch up with you again tomorrow with a brand new episode as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.